I have been dying to ask you all a question. What is the proudest moment of your life? The precious moment that sticks out in your memory and reminds you of just how far you've come. Despite not knowing who you are, I love hearing your proudest moments. It makes me proud of you, and especially proud that a person as amazing as you clicked my third video in my series on the intersection between horror games and the 7 deadly sins. In each episode, I aim to deconstruct the concept of a particular deadly sin and use horror games to provide evocative lessons about the human psyche. If you feel proud about finding your way to this video, let me know which sin you'd like me to continue next, and consider liking and subscribing to get notified of the rest. Today we're discussing pride. Now, there are many things to be ethically prideful over. For example, I hear so many stories of pride in one's children, in one's relationships, in one's career, in one's achievements, in finally playing a game off your backlog then buying 10 more, or even in one's own self-identity. But when we examine pride as one of these 7 deadly sins, it is often seen as the gravest of sins. So where do we draw the line to prevent pride from becoming sinful? If we compare the common definitions, pride can be defined as a feeling of deep pleasure or satisfaction derived from one's own achievements, or even confidence and self-respect as expressed by members of a group, typically one that has been socially marginalized, on the basis of their shared identity, culture, and experience. Now that seems lovely, but when we define pride in relation to the 7 deadly sins, we get an excessive love for one's own excellence and belief in one's superiority. There is one stark concept where we need to draw the line before pride becomes a sin. And it's a concept I want to explore in this video. The concept of superiority. Feeling superior is an idea that I can't fully wrap my head around, because for my whole life, I felt inferior. From the color of my skin, my background, hell, even the fact that I've never been a From Software game before, I was riddled with self-deprecating views, which has only fed my depression. In fact, when I was a teen, I thought I was a monster, an abomination with little idea of what it truly meant to be human. This idea has plagued me for the majority of my life and caused me to gravitate to the novel No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai. Published in 1948, a month after the author had taken his own life, the novel follows the story of a young man, Yozo Oba, who leaves behind journals chronicling his life of alienation, depression, suicidal tendencies, alcoholism, and abuse. It finally ends with Yozo being admitted to a mental institution, where he writes that he had become disqualified as a human being. I had now ceased utterly to be a human being. No Longer Human is a book that comes with much controversy, especially since the book is semi-autobiographical, relating to the actual moments of the author's own troubled life. And mental health has always been heavily stigmatized, especially in 1930s Japan. For me, it was strange to read the book for the first time. Based on the context of the story, I assumed the character would feel like an inferior monster, just like I felt. Especially with such a powerful opening, where we examine the childhood photo of Yozo and are told it is not the smile of a human being. It utterly lacks substance. All of what we might call the heaviness of blood, or perhaps the solidity of human life. It's safe to assume that an author who would write such a self-deprecating view of their fictional selves would lack all semblance of pride. Yozo was inferior, similar to how I felt inferior. And yet, as I read along, there comes a few lines that absolutely baffle me in this so-called representation of inferiority. For example, as Yozo listens to Tsuneko expressing her concerns about her husband in jail, he thinks to himself, "She rambled on, but I have never been able to get interested when women talk about themselves. It may be because women are so inept at telling a story. That is, because they place the emphasis in the wrong places, or for some other reason. In any case, I've always turned them a deaf ear. Pardon my language, but what the hell? Here, I was reading about a man who felt inferior, who had to mimic his mannerisms to blend into society, and ultimately not feel like a part of the human race. But suddenly, he expresses a misogynistic view, making women seem inferior in comparison to himself. He was suddenly made superior. He was prideful. He even writes, but it was an undeniable fact, and not just some foolish delusion on my part, that there lingered about me an atmosphere which could send women into sentimental reveries. I mean, come on! What is up with his idea of women? This misogynistic generality he expresses confused the hell out of me. I understand that during 1930s, and even arguably today, society holds a misogynistic view. But conforming to that standard, despite being no longer human, he feels tragically human. In fact, as I read through Yozo's troubles and depression, I felt that he was dreadfully human. He wasn't this monster or some creature, but just a human. As human as anyone else, with his own set of challenges. So how on earth did such a feeling of superiority come about? Where does this pride come from? If we examine closely, there is a horror when it comes to pride. Because this feeling of superiority comes from a wide range of sources, and it creates a horrific dystopia that expects one unmistakable demand from those that are deemed inferior. The best way I can try to explain exactly where superiority can come from, and this one unmistakable demand, is by discussing two incredible video games, Lies of P and 1000xRESIST. For each of these games, I will be going over a moderate amount of spoilers that hopefully encourages you to still play them, as I will leave out many details. By the end of the video, I hope you'll come to an understanding that changes your view on pride. So let's begin. In Lies of P, published and developed in 2023 by NeoWiz, we play as a version of Pinocchio, the classic character who wishes to become a real boy. Now, Pinocchio is a story about many things: masculinity, coming of age, creation, even God. But the one theme that concerns us today is that Pinocchio is about the deadly sin of pride. In order to properly explain, I will discuss the important details of my favorite adaptation of the Pinocchio story, Lies of P. Because if you weren't aware, the P in Lies of P doesn't stand for Pinocchio. It actually stands for pride. Yeah, I made the whole video just for that joke. In Lies of P, you awake to the ruined city of Krat, a city that has been plagued by the petrification disease, which slowly blinded and turned the inhabitants into stone. And if that didn't kill them, then it must have been the puppet frenzy. You see, in Krat, the famous inventor and dubbed father of puppets, Giuseppe Geppetto, had developed advanced and humanoid servant robots called puppets by using the essence of life named Ergo in order to help Krat prosper. These puppets were not controlled by any strings, but by the Grand Covenant, which ultimately states that puppets need to obey their creator, they must never lie, and they must never kill humans. And then they started killing all the humans. The hubris of man never fails to deliver a punchline. With the Grand Covenant, we can see the one horrific and unmistakable demand that I spoke of earlier. And that demand is obedience. Now, obedience is a scary word. It takes out all autonomy and the chance to live your own life in exchange for the submission to a superior person or entity. This has always been the story of Pinocchio. Pinocchio has always been an ill-mannered, rambunctious puppet. But in order to become a real boy, he is told to be obedient and listen to his father, Geppetto. This is why his punishment for lying has always been the size increase of his nose. Everyone is made aware that he isn't being obedient, and he's only telling lies. But once he obeys, along with showing other positive human characteristics based on the adaptation, he transforms from an inferior puppet to a real boy, a superior being like his father. And that's something society wants us to be proud of. Pinocchio wants to frame the idea that obedience is the one key idea that will promise to lift you from your inferiority. But the truth is, these promises are merely lies. This is made evident in Lies of P, where Pinocchio isn't the only puppet. So are we to promise obedience will make every single inferior puppet into a superior being? Of course not. The Society of Krat has constructed an entire ecosystem that benefits from all the puppets' enslavement. So why would they ever elevate a slave who obeys their masters? Plus, like many stories about robot enslavement, they make the puppets look tragically human, as if to say humanity still craves slavery. They want to have people work obediently for them, to fuel their egos and make them feel superior. They want to be the retired CEOs, while the rest of us are just trying to scrape together a living and make it to tomorrow. In order to do this, to have some people feel superior, a hierarchy needs to be established in which some people are deemed as inferior, ripe for subjugation. For Krat, the inferior beings are the puppets. They are machines, purely obedient, which are not seen as important or as superior as a human. This is how superiority is created. It is molded into society when one class or group of individuals are deemed inferior and given the promise to be elevated into superiority as long as they obey. The most horrifying reality of this society-enabled superiority is the rampant systemic discrimination that occurs. The discrimination built solely on lies, and that the groups labeled inferior have seemingly no power to fight against, and are forced to be obedient. That is, until the puppet frenzy, where every puppet resisted their master's orders and rebelled, killing nearly everyone in the process. Now that's not very obedient, huh? But now we need to discuss why exactly the puppets went to a frenzy. And it's a huge, juicy spoiler, so you have been warned. The perpetrator responsible is none other than Giuseppe Geppetto himself, the father of puppets. Geppetto was a busy man, always working and never having time to play catch with his son, Carlo. But when Carlo contracts the petrification disease and slowly dies as the disease consumed him, Geppetto becomes overwhelmed with grief. He wishes he had spent more time with his son and begins to blame the alchemists, a group of individuals responsible for experimenting and harvesting the life energy ergo off of petrified corpses. A group Geppetto was a part of. Luckily, a startling development happened that gave Geppetto a glimmer of hope in resurrecting his son. The puppets began remembering the memories and experiencing a soul that is not their own. A soul that is from the dead bodies used to create the puppets. Hoping to have his son come alive and be a real boy again, he develops the most advanced, lifelike puppet that looked exactly like his son, Carlo, and not bound by any covenant. This superior puppet is Pinocchio, which we will call P, probably because of copyright. I actually don't know why they call him P, but we will as well, even though it's a dreadful name. In order to hatch his master plan and bring someone back from the dead, P needs to absorb loads of ergo into a system, which is again the living embodiment of souls. So, where do we get souls from? Oh, that's right, by killing people. So Geppetto uses a loophole in the Grand Covenant so that the puppets only obey his command, and expedites thousands of people to an early grave. He then lies to P so that we will kill numerous amounts of puppets and petrified humans, harvesting every ounce of ergo in Krat, to fulfill P's true purpose, merely being a vessel for Geppetto's lustful desire. Wait, sorry, wrong video. At the heart of it, Geppetto felt his son's death shake him to his very core. Despite his mission to help the people of Krat with puppetry, his grief and trauma gave birth to an idea of superiority, that his son should live, while thousands of lesser, inferior people died. This narcissistic view that Geppetto has completely crosses the line from a normal, healthy sense of pride and doubles down on the idea of his own superiority. This grief and narcissism is another cause of these feelings of superiority. Where life felt cruel to Geppetto for taking his son away, so in turn, he becomes cruel to the people he finds not as important. But it's in this monstrous being that Geppetto becomes that we can contrast the so-called inferior being of Pinocchio, who progressively becomes more and more human. His hair begins to grow, and if the player chooses so, he lies to help protect people. He morphs into a hero, a being to be prideful over. But he doesn't become a superior being, or carry the narcissistic view that his father embodied. He becomes as human as anyone, as P understands that both puppets and humans are equal, with puppets experiencing the same emotions such as love and grief, the same ones embodied by the so-called superior humans. The hierarchy that a society like Krat had manifested is built on a lie that claims one group of people superior to another. This leads us to the final moments of the game, where P defeats Simon Bannis, leader of the alchemists, who desired to elevate himself into a divine superior being by using what is known as the arm of God, a plan that ultimately leaves him in a mutated state and able to be defeated by P. Reuniting with his father, Geppetto finally reveals his plan to bring back his son, needing both the final ingredients of the arm of God and P's heart. A heart filled with the immeasurable beauty of what makes us all proudly human. From here, there are two distinct endings that Lies of P allows players to choose. If players obeyed Geppetto and offered over P's heart, Geppetto resurrects his son, Carlo, and subsequently orders him to slaughter anyone who would have known of his crimes. Carlo, an obedient son, does it gladly, and the pair replace everyone with puppet versions of themselves, thus elevating Geppetto into the superior god who created an obedient class of people. What a lovely ending, right? It only serves to fuel Geppetto's pride. However, a happier, better ending is if P refuses Geppetto's request, denying his creator of his own freedom. This rejection isn't a rejection fueled by the desire to continue living rather than dying, but it's fueled by the pride we all share in not wanting to submit to anyone. As Osamu Dazai writes in No Longer Human, human beings never submit to human beings. Even slaves practice their mean retaliations. And Pinocchio is as human as the rest of us. Angered, Geppetto uses Carlo's incomplete body, the nameless puppet, to take P's heart by force. But before the nameless puppet can harm P, Geppetto sacrifices himself. Depending on the amount of humanity that P embodies, Geppetto either looks to P as an inferior puppet responsible for his death, or his son, someone he tried so excruciatingly hard to force obedience upon, and someone now completely equal in his eyes. This is the horror of pride. It creates a false hierarchy of superiority that, as Lies of P tells us, can come from society's framing of superior beings, or even from a narcissistic father who believes his own selfish desires are important above everyone else. Superiority begs obedience from inferior beings and blinds those who think they're above the rest from recognizing the importance, love, and care from those around them. Within Lies of P, and even common Pinocchio retellings, Pinocchio is a symbol of equality. They show that no matter our differences or what we're made up of, we should be proud and celebrate in them. For they all make us uniquely equal, always deserving of love and care, and never superior to the ones different from us. If we can recognize the inherent equality in everyone, then we will have built a society to be proud of. But now the question arises, if Pinocchio is a story on how we should celebrate our differences and recognize us as equal despite our materials, what happens when there are no differences and everyone is the same? 1000xRESIST is the Everything Everywhere All at Once of video games. Developed by Sunset Visitor and published by Fellow Traveler in 2024, the game explores themes of intergenerational trauma, being part of an Asian diaspora community, and the power within us to resist tyrannical systems. But today, we're going to be focused on the idea of pride. Now, I highly recommend you play this game. It is a masterpiece, one of the best and most horrifying pieces of narrative fiction in all of video games. For this video, since the majority of the narrative is told out of order, I cannot emphasize enough that I will not be doing the game's narrative justice by explaining it chronologically. This is a far inferior way than experiencing it yourself. In addition, I will be skipping over many plot points that doesn't pertain to the theme of pride. So, as always, you have been warned. 1000xRESIST is a story told in 4 generations. Sort of. Throughout each generation, the dominating phrase that rules their lives echoes constantly. Mother proudly knows best. So when a young man meets a young woman, Clara, for the first time during the 2019 Hong Kong riots, the real-life riots fueled by the fear of Hong Kong losing its own autonomy and being obedient to China, they quickly fall in love, as one does when bleeding on the side of the road. They then rush to leave Hong Kong in favor of Toronto, Canada, for safer and greener pastures. The couple, now Mr. and Mrs. Kwan, abandon their home of Hong Kong, leaving their culture and family behind, against the behest of Clara's own mother, who argued that they shouldn't leave. Oh, but Clara could not wait to get out from her mother's thumb, to be fully autonomous, not concerning herself with the cultural expectations of being obedient, and finally free of feeling inferior. When it comes to parenting fueled by pride, especially when a mother treats her daughter with a mother proudly knows best attitude, it often manifests itself as an adversarial relationship, where the child has to argue against the idea that they are inferior to their supposedly superior parents, that the child can have valid opinions of their own, and that they will resist their parents' expectations and demands of obedience. That same horrific and unmistakable demand that I spoke of earlier. This adversarial relationship is the type of relationship that Clara has with her own mother, which is then passed down as Clara has her own child, Iris. Born in Toronto, Iris becomes a very troubled child as she is harboring generational trauma, as well as the challenges of growing up as a part of a marginalized community with roots from Hong Kong. She often feels out of place, ashamed, and inferior to her classmates, and desires only to fit in, even arguing that pizza would be a better lunch than noodles on her birthday party. From developing an eating disorder to even microwaving her hamster as a child, Iris begins to feel the immense pressure and trauma from being Clara's daughter. When Clara and Mr. Kwan decided to have Iris, there were a lot of expectations. Mr. Kwan didn't want to bring a child into this messed up world, but Clara needed this child to, in a way, restore her dignity and pride. Oftentimes, our parents want us to be better than they ever were, but they take a strange approach by belittling us and making us feel inferior, all in the hopes that their children would be obedient, because the parents are making themselves seem superior. After all, Mother proudly knows best, even what's unquestionably best for her children, right? This is another one of those sources of the feeling of superiority. From Clara and now passed on to Iris, those who have been made to feel inferior and shamed for it may overcompensate by developing a superiority complex. This is exactly what happens as a new international student from mainland China, Zhao, meets Iris for the first time. There were numerous similarities that Iris and Zhao shared, but Iris saw Zhao as an opportunity to showcase her superiority. She desired to stand above a person who was equal to her. So she bullied Zhao, spreading rumors and ultimately making her feel like an inferior alien, all in order to feed her own prideful superiority complex, a product of her own feelings of inferiority. But speaking of aliens, let's talk about the actual horror of 1000xRESIST. Because, if you can believe it, there is something scarier than teenage girls. The occupants, a race of sadistic aliens that descend upon Earth and try to communicate with humans. Unfortunately, humans stupidly try to communicate by using a piano to play 1,000 Miles by Vanessa Carlton, an instrument the occupants hate because it sounds like a form of dissonance. So, as aliens do, they jump to the conclusion that humans like disorganization, and thus start making people cry. Oh, and our tears are delicious. So much so that they make humans cry until all the liquid is expunged from their body, resulting in death, a concept that occupants don't seem to understand. They love our misery because they feed off of powerful memories, storing them and keeping them within themselves to nourish them. And what memories are more powerful than the ones that make us cry? So, when Iris bullies Zhao at their school dance, enough to bring her to tears, the occupants come down and feast upon Zhao's misery, effectively killing her. The only person who made an effort to befriend Iris and loved who she was. Iris, on the other hand, is granted immunity from this crying disease that soon begins to infect the whole world population, all because of one simple fact. She was mean and caused misery to a person who the occupants could feast on. This act marked Iris as superior, and she was granted immortality, becoming Earth's greatest asset. Iris took pride in this fact, tinged with a hint of guilt over her own survival, so that when a military organization wanted her to be experimented on in order to make a cure, she jumped at the chance, abandoning her own mother and getting out from under her suffocating thumb. It's said that history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. Clara had left her mother in Hong Kong to break this feeling of inferiority and suffocating expectation of obedience, and Iris does the same by leaving her own mother. Despite the world of difference in the way that they grew up, they were doomed to repeat the same cycles as before, because 1000xRESIST is not the story of equality, but the differences in our upbringing, locations and behaviors and personality that still unite us and make us equal. This is highlighted when Iris becomes a mother herself, after successful and torturous experiments allow her to create clones of herself. Yes, you heard me. Skipped a few steps there, but yes, this is where the story goes. Clones. After everyone dies and Iris clones herself, Iris had now become the All-Mother, a superior religious head in charge of 5 clones, who are nearly identical. So as superior beings do, she reduces her clones to just their roles rather than giving them names. We have Fixer, who fixes things, Healer, who heals things, Knower, who knows things, Bang Bang Fire, who bang bang fire things, and the youngest, Watcher, who watches things. Despite each being a clone of Iris, they are treated differently, with Watcher being the odd one out after creepily watching the rest. This treatment makes Watcher begin to feel inferior compared to her sisters. She feels not as loved or as special as the rest of them, which leads her to commit the original sin. When each of the clones were made, Iris commanded them to do one simple thing. Do not make clones of yourself. No clones of clones. It is forbidden, and you need to obey her command because Mother proudly knows best. But enacting laws is not the same as guaranteeing obedience. So when Watcher finds a strand of Zhao's hair, the same Zhao that Iris bullied and then lamented over her loss, Watcher thinks of a genius plan to clone a version of Zhao as a birthday present to Iris. Now that's a loophole you could really be proud of. In her excitement, the Zhao clone is pulled prematurely and has horrible defects. Watcher doesn't mind. This is her first child, a child that would restore her dignity and ensure her superiority, just as Clara had in mind when she had Iris. But Iris does not see this disfigured version of Zhao as a gift, but as a disgrace, an inferior attempt to win her favor, and ultimately a haunting reminder of her trauma. Iris does what she does best, kills Zhao, and punishes Watcher by leaving her in isolation to repent, grow, and atone for her sin. This is another prime example of the horrors of pride, and the idea where this superiority complex comes from. It comes from the feeling of inferiority that shame you for existing in the way that you are, which is ultimately fueled by the absence of love. You can make the argument that both Clara and Iris loved their children, yet the children experienced a lack of love, bundled with the pressure to be better than their mothers. A pressure that would always make them feel inferior, because their mothers always expressed their superiority. So, in retaliation, the children developed this superiority complex, believing themselves to be above everyone else, even above their own identical clones. In addition, they would spend the rest of their lives resisting the doctrine of Mother proudly knows best. This resistance is exactly what Iris's youngest child does for the next 1,000 years. She begins cloning herself, creating a society of thousands of identical clones, and continuing to commune with her own children as she takes up the role of principal. Eventually, she corrupts one of her newly selected watchers against the religious teachings of Iris, the All-Mother. Principal orchestrates the descent of this naive watcher to the dark side, like an evil, copyright-free emperor. With this new watcher's corruption, she kills Iris in a rage, and Principal takes over, the head of the newly established provisional government. She places herself at the head of a society built upon identical clones. As Osamu Dazai writes in his novel, No Longer Human, it's not society. You're the one who won't stand for it, right? If you do such a thing, society will make you suffer for it. It's not society. It's you, isn't it? The society in 1000xRESIST isn't a living entity, but a demand of obedience from every person dictated by a single person. Principal took the society ruled by a defunct religion and transformed it into an authoritarian regime, thus completing the cycle that Clara worked so hard to run away from in Hong Kong. What did I tell you? History rhymes a lot sometimes. This has been Principal's plan, her revenge for what her mother had done to her, and for all the years she felt inferior. This government she establishes is her own child, in a sense, and she desires it to be far more superior than her mother could have ever created. Because, despite how many times we can hear, Mother proudly knows best, the children will always resist. And they will continue to proudly resist even in an authoritarian regime. 1000xRESIST is a masterpiece of narrative storytelling, so much so that it has entered into my psyche and changed the way I view video games for the better. It leaves you with the idea that not everything fits in the backpack. You always have a choice in what trauma and issues you carry with you, and what trauma you try to put away, despite how hard it can be. But with this superior level of storytelling comes the horror of pride, a horror that highlights two main sources of superiority, one of which is inferiority, often accompanied by a lack of love. Clara felt inferior when being chastised for leaving Hong Kong. Iris felt inferior when growing up in Toronto and being chastised for leaving with the military. The youngest, watcher turned principal, felt inferior for failing to make her mother happy. Finally, the final generation, the numerous clones of principal, felt inferior for being at the lower rungs of the hierarchy established by the provisional government. In each scenario, this lack of love causes a superiority complex to form, all because it's a deflection of their own feeling of inferiority and a desire to feel powerful and in control, an overcompensation and substitute for the love they wish they felt. In addition, superiority arises from both the development of a hierarchy within both a society and a family. Similarly to Lies of P, society is structured to grant power to those it has deemed superior. And in a family, those superior members are the parents, especially the mothers who proudly know best. But 1000xRESIST questions this hierarchy, either through a religious context or a governmental structure. It showcases that the hierarchy isn't built by superior beings, but throughout equal beings, each with their own unique personalities and behaviors. Despite their differences, they are all the same and aren't inferior for being children, for they are an equal version of their parents, with genes and traits passed down and mixed in with your own conceptions and experiences of the world. So if we fall in line to bend the knee to a supposedly superior being, are we worshiping a god or merely just a prouder version of ourselves? God, I ask you, is non-resistance a sin? This is the answer that I want to leave you all with today. The horror of pride is a command of obedience to a falsely superior being, and it's mind-boggling to see how this superiority develops. Lies of P is a story about the equality in those who have such stark and inherent differences. So it highlights how superiority can be created by a society establishing a hierarchy to enslave inferior beings, and from a father's narcissistic desire that placed P as the solution to his grief. A solution seemingly superior than the lives of thousands of individuals. 1000xRESIST, on the other hand, is a story about the overwhelming differences in people who are inherently equal. Everyone is born with many differences from one another, but are all united with equal genetics, which lead themselves on a path to commit the same acts and missteps as generations prior. The same generations that they have the pressure to be better than. So it highlights that superiority comes from overcompensating a feeling of inferiority from those around you, and from a mother's overbearing parenting style and lack of love, which tells a child that they are inferior to their mother. No matter the origin of this superiority, we need to examine it as a lie, perpetuated for the liar's benefit. We need to resist against this false sense of superiority, because we truly aren't inferior, no matter who tells us we are. Because all it boils down to is the agenda that they want to feel power and control over you. They want your obedience, even downplaying the severity and horror of slavery. But isn't it strange that these individuals belittle us, making us feel ignorant about this created hierarchy, when they are the ones ignorant and believing that they are superior than anyone else? It's a tragedy to know that it's not the ignorance that horrifies us, but the pride in being comfortable in that ignorance that allows for heinous acts filled with prejudice. Racism, sexism, homophobia, and more are rooted in the horror of pride. And I can't believe how falsely superior people believe themselves to be. Just like the protagonist in Osamu Dazai's No Longer Human, who, despite his claim of not being human, abides by the societal hierarchy that women are seen as inferior to men. It's as if he sees himself at the bottom of the ladder, and yet he stands on the shoulders of women to keep him elevated higher than they are. Just like Lies of P, he develops an idea of superiority based solely on the hierarchy that society has created. In addition, his superiority can also be attributed to an overbearing parent and a distinct lack of love, similar to 1000xRESIST. This is highlighted by the final line in the novel, as an outside party reminisces about Yozo's life. "It's his father's fault," she said unemotionally. "The Yozo we knew was so easygoing and amusing, and if only he hadn't drunk. No, even though he did drink, he was a good boy. An angel." These are the examples of how superiority can create a horrific display of pride in our society and ruin our chances for a society based in equality. Now, there is one idea that I haven't really discussed throughout this video. Earlier I mentioned myself, how I've always felt inferior and monstrous. So where does a healthy sense of pride come from? One that doesn't bleed into superiority. I vividly remember this feeling when I was 12 years old. One day, one of my classmates, Diane, had woven friendship bracelets for her friends. She passed them out with much excitement, proud of how well they turned out. I wasn't close friends with her, so I never expected her to include me in her gifts. And yet, she handed me one, willing to include me in her circle. I had felt inferior, a monster, undeserving of even a simple friendship bracelet. But wearing it for months after served as a constant reminder that I was worthy. I wasn't disqualified from being human. In fact, I was as human as anyone else. All it takes to help someone feel proud of who they are is inclusion, bundled with love and care. It can help develop a healthy sense of pride to know that they are included amongst everyone else in the universe. Had Geppetto included P and proudly loved him as a son, or had Clara included Iris and proudly loved her as a daughter, who knows what could have happened? All I know is that we would have been proud of what's to come. Thank you so much for watching this video. This is the third video in my Horror of series, which you should definitely check out the rest of if you like this video, as well as my other videos. Let me know which deadly sin you'd like me to continue with next, and check the links in the description to find ways to support me, like my Patreon, and even subscribe to get notified of when my next video releases. That is all for now. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really proud of you for getting to the end, and I hope you are doing well. See you all in the next video.